When you think of the American West, you might be thinking tight roping, straight shooting, fast riding, hard drinking, cowboys, John Wayne, bank robbing, shootouts, John Wayne, and you'd be right. But there's limitless tales from the West. One not as common, but very significant to it, even with its short span, was that of the Pony Express. The American West is iconic, and this is but a piece of it. The Pony Express was an American fast mail service that used young men on horseback to deliver mail over the distance of 1,966 miles. Telegraphic communication at the time was covering just about half that distance, and then couriers on horseback covering the rest. The Express reduced time for messages. They traveled across the Great Plains and through the Rocky Mountains of Missouri to California in unprecedented time, to about 10 days. The Pony Express was the fastest mail service in the West. An example was California's newspaper received word of Lincoln's election in 7 days and 17 hours after the East Coast papers, which was an unrivaled feat at the time. It was the West's most direct east-to-west communication, prior to the first transcontinental telegraph. This relay system was the most direct and practical means of east-to-west communications in 1860. The operation of the Pony Express lasted for just 18 months, from April 3rd of 1860 to October 26th of 1861. The route stretched from St. Joseph, Missouri to Sacramento, California. The Express was owned by its parent company, the Central Overland, California and Pikes Peak Express Company. Although it was not a financial success, and unfortunately went bankrupt, the Pony Express is still synonymous with the classic Western era. After gold was discovered in California in 1848, obviously it was swarmed by prospectors, investors, and businessmen. By 1860, the population hit nearly 380,000, which means there was a demand for a faster way to get mail and other communications to and from the westernmost state. It became even greater with the upcoming American Civil War approaching. The Pony Express was founded, owned, and operated by William H. Russell, Alexander Majors, and William B. Waddell. Russell, Majors, and Waddell were already in business prior to the creation of the Pony Express, through their parent company, Central Overland, California and Pikes Peak Express Company, which was a stagecoach company. Russell was a prominent businessman. Waddell was a co-owner of a firm called Moorhead, Waddell & Co., which got bought out. With various company transactions, eventually the Pony Express was one of the many results. Apparently, Moorhead was bought out. Waddell merged his company with Russell, changing the name to Waddell & Russell. 1855, they took a new partner, Alexander Majors, and founded the company Russell, Majors, and Waddell. 1859, apparently, C.R. Moorhead took a proposal of the idea of Pony Express to President Buchanan. Although Russell, Majors, and Waddell were contracted to deliver military supplies, Russell thought of the idea to deliver fast mail with shorter routes and mounted riders instead of stagecoaches. The trio set out to prove that the central route was viable all year long. They proposed a fast mail service between St. Joseph, Missouri and Sacramento, California, with letters delivered in 10 days, which many said was impossible. The Pony Express was organized and assembled in the winter of 1860 in 2 months, accumulating 120 riders, 156 stations, 400 mounts, and several hundred personnel during January and February of 1861. On June 16, 1860, about 10 weeks after the Pony Express began operations, Congress authorized a bill to subsidize a transcontinental telegraph line to connect the Missouri River and the Pacific coast. This resulted in the incorporation of the Overland Telegraph Company of California and the Pacific Telegraph Company of Nebraska. During the construction of the telegraph lines, the Pony Express operated as usual. Letters, newspapers traveled from the length of the Pony Express route, where telegrams traveled between wire ends. On October 24th of 1861, the first transcontinental telegraph line was completed. On October 25th of 1861, Stephen J. Field, the Chief Justice of California, sent the first cross-country message on the new line to President Abraham Lincoln in Washington, D.C., stating, "In the temporary absence of the governor of the state, I am requested to send you the first message, which will be transmitted over the wires of the telegraph line, which connect the Pacific with the Atlantic states. The people of California desire to congratulate you upon the completion of the great work. They believe that it will be the means of strengthening the attachment which bind both the East and West to the Union, and they desire in this, the first message, across the continent to express their loyalty to that Union and their determination to stand by the government in this, its day of trial. They regard that government with affection and will adhere to it under all fortunes." On October 26, 1861, San Francisco was in direct contact with New York City, and the Pony Express was officially terminated. In conclusion, the Pony Express was able to deliver 35,000 letters between St. Joseph and Sacramento in that short 18-month span. Out of those 35,000 letters, publicly, there are just 250 examples of the Pony Express mail left. At the beginning of the Pony Express, the initial price of mail that weighed a half an ounce was $5, then dropped down to $2.50, and by July of 1861, a month prior to its closing, to $1, and stayed that price till the Pony Express concluded. The initial price, $5, was 25,000% higher than the price of mail through the normal mail service, which was only 2 cents at the time. The founders of the Pony Express hoped to win an exclusive government mail contract, but that didn't come about. Despite being twice as fast as any competitors at the time, the Pony Express was a financial failure. It grossed just $90,000 and lost $200,000. The Pony Express was a success when it comes to speed and delivery of the mail, cutting time in half. The company lost $30 on every letter carried, eventually being forced to sell. In March of 1682, the Central Overland, California and Pikes Peak Express Company was sold at Leavenworth, Kansas, to satisfy a mortgage held by Benjamin Holliday, who bought the property. In November of 1866, after the Civil War was done, Holliday sold the Pony Express assets, along with the remnants of the Butterfield stage, to Wells Fargo for $1.5 million. The Pony Express trail route was almost 2,000 miles long, which consisted or seemed to at least concluded with about 190 stations. The terrain and horse travel determined the number and distance between stations. The route was split up into 5 divisions: St. Joseph to Fort Kearny to Horseshoe Station to Salt Lake City to Roberts Creek, and Roberts Creek to Sacramento, each with its own superintendent. Stations were about 10 miles apart along the route, and that route traveled through 8 states: Missouri, Kansas, Nebraska, Colorado, Wyoming, Utah, Nevada, and into California. The pony stations were often fashioned out of existing structures, some of them located in military forts. Stations that already existed for the stagecoach line were also used for the pony ranches, if the location fit, while stations were built new in remote areas where needed. There were relay or swing stations. which were used in exchange of tired mounts for new ones, and home stations, which seemed to be typically older stage stations. It had horses and provided room and board for riders between runs or trips. Apparently, there were about 25 home stations on the route. Also, ranches or road ranches in the Pony Express days were watering spots, little supply stores, immigrant trail hostels, stopover places, or the like. Not the typical ranches we know of today. The reliance on the Pony Express was the ability and endurance of tough, rugged riders and fast horses. But there were different types of jobs of the Pony Express. There were an estimated 80 to 100 riders or expressmen traveling east or west along the route at any given moment. In addition, about 400 other employees, which included station keepers, stock tenders, and route superintendents. There was also over 400 horses Alexander Majors acquired for the Pony Express. He selected the horses around the West, paying an average of $200 per horse. The riders endured unbearable weather conditions like dust storms, the heat from the Great Plains, walls of ice and snow in the Rocky Mountains, Indian attacks, to even wild animals. There's no official company records listing of all the riders. There's been lists compiled as best they can from various sources, including newspaper accounts, secondary sources, or family histories. There seemed to be at least 200 riders employed in that 18-month span, which isn't too surprising with the dangers and conditions the expressmen had to endure. According to the National Park Service, 4 pony riders were killed by Indians. One was hanged for murder when he got drunk and killed a man. One died in an unrelated accident, and 2 froze to death. That's just the riders. A typical shift of a rider was 75 to 100 miles. Sometimes in emergencies they rode day and night, or even 2 stages back to back, over 20 hours of riding. Every station the expressmen changed out horses, got a bite, and just took the mochila with them. Apparently, employers stressed the importance of the mochila to where the horse and rider would perish prior to the mochila. The mochila could hold 20 pounds of mail. The material carried on the horse was 20 pounds. Eventually, everything except 1 revolver and 1 water sack was removed, allowing a total of 165 pounds on the horse's back. Riders couldn't weigh over 125 pounds. The riders weighed usually between 100 and 125 pounds. Riders received up to $25 per week as pay. A comparable wage for unskilled labor at the time was about $1 per week. The station keepers and stock tenders were as essential to the Pony Express as the riders were. It wasn't easy for them also. There was isolation, primitive and dangerous conditions they endured. Stations were attacked, burned down, keepers killed, with horses stolen, especially during the Paiute Indian War, which started in May of 1860. They suspended delivery between Carson City and Salt Lake City for about a month in June of 1860. The Paiute War was a minor series of raids and ambushes, imitated by American expansion into the territory of the Paiute Indian tribe in Nevada, which resulted in the disruption of mail services of the Pony Express. The war took place between May through June of 1860. There was just once that the mail didn't go through. Once completing 8 weekly trips from both Sacramento and St. Joseph, the Pony Express was forced to suspend mail services because of the Paiute Indian War in May of 1860. Numega, the Paiute chief, fasted and argued for 3 days for peace, but his tribe took a raiding party to Williams Station, for reasons disputed. Some say to start a war, some say 2 Paiute women were kidnapped. The war party killed 5 men and burned down the station. More incidences continued in the Paiute country with ambushes and deaths. 7 more express stations were attacked. Apparently 16 employees were killed, with about 150 mounts stolen or let go. The war itself cost the company $75,000 in livestock and equipment. But concluded in June of that year when U.S. troops intervened. According to the Columbia Tribune, 16 stock handlers, or tenders, were killed in the short 18-month span, which means if the reports were true of the number of deaths of employees that weren't writers, it was those of the Paiute War. The route went through enormous changes over the time span to adjust to ground conditions, seasons, and many more circumstances. Not all stations that were listed were used all the time. Stations were added and removed when necessary, which explains why there's so many different reports with the amount of stations there were, from 150 to 200. On the mail was postmarks, which is a postal marking made on an envelope, parcel, postcard, or the like, indicating the place, date, and time that the item was delivered into the care of any postal service, or sometimes indicating where and when received or in transit. There was various postmarks added to the mail by the Pony Express at the point of departure. The Pony Express used a variety of different postmarks on the mail it carried across the western United States. There are only 250 known examples of surviving Pony Express mail or postmarks in various collections today, bearing one of more than a dozen different types of postmarks. The Pony Express's mochila is a lightweight saddle with a mail pouch separate from the saddle, which was able to attach and detach from one saddle to the next. There was even an oath that the Pony Express riders had to take. Majors was a religious man and resolved that by the help of God to overcome all difficulties. Majors presented each rider with a special Bible and required this oath, which they also required to sign. It states, "I do hereby swear before the great and living God that during my engagement and while I am an employee of Russell, Majors, and Waddell, I will, under no circumstances, use profane language, that I will drink no intoxicating liquors, that I will not quarrel or fight with any other employee of the firm, and that in every respect I will conduct myself honestly, be faithful to my duties, and so direct all my acts as to win the confidence of my employers, so help me God." The first journeys were well documented, at least eastbound. The first westbound trip was out of St. Joseph on April 3, 1860, and arrived 10 days later in Sacramento, California on April 14th at 1 a.m. The first mochila westbound contained 49 letters, 5 private telegrams, and some papers for San Francisco and intermediate points. There's one letter that is known to exist from that first trip west. There's a long dispute of who the first rider westbound out of St. Joseph was. First account was Johnny Fry. Then there's reports that the real man out first was Johnson William Richardson, or Billy Richardson, reported by Weekly West. Apparently in this instance, there were a group of men that drew straws, in which Johnny Fry drew the shortest. The morning prior, April 2nd, Mr. Fry reportedly got injured, to which Billy was next in line to make an 80-mile route run to Seneca, Kansas, because he drew the next shortest straw. Also, Billy Richardson rode the whole length of the Pony Express's existence as well. But there was a third report, from a rider called John H. Keatley, or Jack Keatley. A St. Joseph manufacturer and wholesaler, Huston Wyeth, wrote Mr. Keatley in 1907 about information on the first rider out of St. Joseph. Mr. Keatley, in a letter sent back on August 21st of 1907, stated, "Alex Carlisle was the first man to ride the Pony Express out of St. Joe. He was a nephew of the superintendent of the stage line to Denver, called the Pikes Peak Express. The superintendent's name was Ben Ficklin. Carlisle was a consumptive and could not stand the hardships, and retired after 2 months of trail, and died within 6 months of retiring. John Fry was the second rider, and I was the third, and Gus Cliff was the fourth. I made the longest ride, stopping only to change horses. It was said to be 300 miles, and was done a few minutes inside of 24 hours. The ride was made from Big Sandy to St. Joe, and returning from the westbound mail to Seneca without a stop. Not taking time to rest, but eating lunch as I rode. The first eastbound Pony Express left Sacramento on April 3, 1860, and arrived at its destination 10 days later in St. Joseph, Missouri. There are just 2 letters known to exist from the eastbound trip. James Randall is credited as the first eastbound rider from San Francisco to Sacramento. Then, William Hamilton, or Sam Hamilton, was the first rider from Sacramento to the Sports Hall Station in California. There's many notable and famous riders, obviously starting with Johnny Fry, an accomplished horseman. Alexander Majors asked him to ride for the Pony Express. There's William Campbell. He was originally hired as a bullwhacker, then sent west to build stations for the Pony Express. Then there's Major Howard Egan. Major Egan was a part of the Pioneer Party of 1847 that journeyed to the west to modern-day Salt Lake City, Utah. When originally joining the Pony Express, he was appointed as superintendent of the division from Salt Lake City, Utah to Roberts Creek. The major filled in when others couldn't ride. As mentioned earlier, there was Sam Hamilton. He was hired for Bolivar Roberts' division because he knew the territory. When the first westbound mail arrived, he carried it from Placerville to Sacramento, where he boarded the boat, horse and all, for San Francisco. You might recognize the name James Butler Hickok, or Wild Bill Hickok. He never worked as a rider, but he did as a stock tender, supposedly. Robert Haslam, or Pony Bob Haslam, became known as one of the first daring riders of the Pony Express. He was 20 when he was hired by Bolivar Roberts, the division superintendent of Carson City, Nevada. He was hired to help build stations, then was assigned the run from Friday Station Lake Tahoe to Buckland Station Fort Churchill, 75 miles east. He's credited with 2 of the Pony Express's records, the longest round trip and the fastest trip. May 9, 1860, the longest round trip was when he received the eastbound mail at Friday Station. The Paiute Indians were on the warpath. When he finally arrived at Buckland Station, Nevada, his relief was so badly petrified over the Indian threat that he refused to take the mail. Pony Bob saddled up and continued to Smith's Creek, where he passed on the pouches to J.G. Kelly, completing the 190-mile run. Once rested, he mounted a fresh horse and retraced his steps of the route with westbound mail. Upon arriving at Cold Springs, Indians had raided the place, killing the station keeper and driving off the horses. He continued on with his tired mount, 37 miles to Sand Springs, remounted, got to Carson River, to finally Buckland Station within 4 hours of the scheduled time. By the time Pony Bob finally returned to his home station, he had traveled 380 miles in less than 40 hours, a Pony Express record. On March 4th, 1861, the fastest run by the Pony Express was carrying President Lincoln's inaugural address, which took the Pony Express a total of 7 days and 17 hours. A new record, which was supposed to be 10 days, 8 hours and 20 minutes of it was Pony Bob when he traveled 120 miles in that almost 9-hour stretch. He was even wounded because he was attacked by Indians. After the conclusion of the Pony Express, Pony Bob went on to work for Wells Fargo and Company, who purchased the Pony Express. Next is John H. Keatley, or Jack Keatley. Keatley was one of the riders who rode for the Pony Express the whole 18-month length of the Pony Express's existence. Mr. Keatley rode some 340 miles in 31 hours without a significant stop and arrived at his final destination asleep in the saddle. The youngest rider of the Pony Express was Charlie Miller, or Bronco Charlie. He was 11 when he rode for it. Later working for Buffalo Bill's Wild West show, he fought in World War I at the age of 67. At the age of 81, he delivered letters on horseback from New York City to San Francisco to celebrate the 70th anniversary of the Pony Express. Then, at age 92, applied to join the Army for World War II, but was turned down. Billy Tate was 14 when he was a Pony Express rider. Apparently, he was chased by a band of Paiute Indians on horseback, where he was forced to retreat into some hills behind some big rocks. Tate killed 7 of his assailants in a shootout before being killed himself. He was riddled with arrows, but was not scalped, a sign that the Paiutes honored their enemies. Then there was Elijah Nicholas Wilson, or Uncle Nick, born April 1842. When he was 12, he decided to go and live with the great chief Washakie and the Eastern Shoshone people. When the Pony Express started hiring young riders, 18-year-old Wilson joined up. One outlandish event occurred on Wilson's way back from driving horses to Antelope Station in Nevada, through Superintendent Howard Egan's division of the Pony Express route. Wilson stopped at Spring Valley Station, where he was met by 2 orphaned boys who had been abandoned by the station manager to run the operation by themselves. They asked Wilson to stay for supper. After he led his horse out to graze, he noticed the horses going towards a patch of cedar or pinyon pine trees. They were being driven away by 2 Indians, likely Paiutes or Shoshone. With guns blazing, Wilson sprinted towards the horses, trying to reach them before they were taken away. He fired 3 times at the men and missed. One of the raiders shot an arrow at Wilson, the flint-tipped arrow striking him 2 inches above his left eye. As the raiders drove off with the horses, the 2 boys reached Wilson and tried to yank the arrow from his forehead, but it wouldn't give. They broke off the shaft, leaving the flint tip buried in Wilson's forehead. The boys rolled him up under the trees, thinking he was as good as dead. As Wilson lay unconscious, they ran for help at the next station. This is where some of the details of this story get a little hazy. It is not known for sure if the boys ran for help at Antelope Spring Station about 13 miles to the east, or they ran to Shell Creek, apparently 10 miles to the west. They came back the next day with more men to help with Wilson's burial, only to find him still alive. They carried Wilson back to the station and called for a doctor from Ruby Valley, 60 miles to the west, to treat the wounded and unconscious rider. Although the doctor was able to dig out the arrowhead, he didn't think the outlook was good. He prescribed the station boys to apply wet cloths onto Wilson's head, and he left. 6 days into his treatment, Superintendent Egan happened to be by the station and saw Wilson unconscious but still alive. He sent for the doctor to come again from Ruby Valley and give further treatment. Wilson was unconscious for 18 days. Once he awoke, he recovered quickly and returned to riding the dangerous express line. Afterward, Wilson was always seen wearing a hat low over his forehead to cover his scar. The head injury plagued him with headaches for the rest of his life. The scrape with death didn't slow him down. He continued to ride for the Pony Express until it shut down in October of 1861. He would go on to live a full life as a pioneer of the West and making a reputation for himself as a storyteller. He picked up the nickname Uncle Nick from children who loved to hear him spinning yarns. He learned to read and write so he could share his adventures with a wider audience. His story was also portrayed in the 2000 film Wind River. The last name on the list is one of the most notorious names you will hear. William Cody, or Buffalo Bill Cody. Almost all the references upon Buffalo Bill's timeline has different details and descriptions of the time in the Pony Express, from his age of 14 to 15 and his record-breaking and all the incredible threats he faced in the wilds. One thing seems to be sure, he did have an involvement with the Pony Express, or at least associated companies with it. It might have been a way station builder or a messenger, but there's no records of him carrying mail. But the tale goes, apparently he had a hand in building several way stations, then became an expressman himself. There's no telling if his accounts are true or not, but they are interesting. Whether he was a messenger or writer, Wild Bill became famous through his Wild West show, which included tales and reenactments of Pony Express rides. The trail is a remnant of what it once was because of human activities and by time. The trail's been converted over the years to dirt roads in short, pristine segments believed to be parts of the original trail. But there are 50 existing Pony Express stations, or station ruins. The route of the Pony Express was declared the Pony Express National Historic Trail August 3, 1992, by an act of Congress. The full route stretches through the 8 states. It includes substantial sections of land managed by the Bureau of Land Management in California, Colorado, Nevada, Utah, and Wyoming. The route includes an auto tour, historic sites, some way stations, way station remnants, visit interpretive sites, museums, and hike, bike, or horseback riding trails. One of the few original stations left is the Holenberg Pony Express Station, located in Hanover, Kansas. It was built by Gerard H. Holenberg in 1857. There's a center near the historic building that can be visited by the public with an interpretive exhibit. Fun fact, in 1869, the U.S. Post Office issued the first U.S. postage stamp to depict an actual historic event, with the subject of the Pony Express. Till then, it was just the faces of George Washington, Benjamin Franklin, Thomas Jefferson, and Andrew Jackson were on the U.S. postage. Historians, collectors, researchers, folklorists, etc. slowly pieced together the puzzle that was that of the 18-month run of the Pony Express through records, papers, letters, and mailings by the most historical evidence, till people gave a damn, which was apparently back in the 1950s. It was all little accounts of hearsay and folklore, with no verification in many areas. Even with the information we do have, we might be putting the puzzle pieces in the wrong areas. The folk in that time and place will be the sole survivors of the truth. There are complete books on the Pony Express. The Story of the Pony Express by Raymond and Mary Settle. The Settles used historical papers by the Pony Express founder, William B. Waddell. Allegedly, Mr. Settle prepared to publish his well-researched account with a decent volume of footnotes and citations prepared. But the editors cut a decent portion of them out. They went for a less expensive print and published for an accurate but simplified version of his original publishing. The story of the Pony Express is still the most looked at when it comes to historical accuracy. Since there wasn't much documented information, we're still piecing together the history of the Pony Express. One of the pieces from the timeline of the Pony Express is extremely far-fetched, but one of the biggest pieces. One of the most interesting and unfortunate instances of the Pony Express, but significant in U.S. postal history, is categorized as interrupted mail, which took place on July 21st of 1860. The envelope, which kept the 10-cent stamp, which meant it was going to be a 2-month boat ride down the west coast through Panama, then up the east coast to New York City. But the additional cost for the Pony Express service guaranteed it would make it to its destination in about 12 days. So it wasn't just going to St. Joseph, Missouri, it was going to New York City. So someone changed their mind and paid $5 more to get the express. Unfortunately, it wasn't going to be the case. An unknown rider headed east out of San Francisco went missing somewhere in Nevada and was assumed to be killed by Indians. On the 3rd of May, 1862, the machula was recovered, still containing letters bound east, with letters then forwarded to destinations. In August of 1862, the letter finally reached its destination in New York City. It took over 2 years. Its destination was a company called Fred Probst & Co. So much happened between the time it was sent, July 21st of 1860, and when it arrived at its destination, August of 1862. For example, Lincoln's election, and the beginning of the Civil War. When the letter arrived, the Pony Express was shut down. Today, just a few items from the modula are left, but my focus was on that envelope. The original letter that was inside is obviously gone, but the envelope is still here nonetheless. The envelope is in the Smithsonian's National Postal Museum, apparently owned by William H. Gross. There's been notable celebrations and commemorations since its closing. One is in 1935, the Pony Express Diamond Jubilee, which took place between April 3rd and October 24th of 1935. The highlight of the event was between August 8th and 23rd. The event was basically 300 Boy Scouts carried letters addressed to President Franklin D. Roosevelt from governors and other officials along the trail from Sacramento to St. Joseph. Apparently there were some scouts that were descendants of original writers. Then from St. Joseph, the Oregon Trail Memorial Association arranged an Army airplane to fly the mail from St. Joseph to Washington, D.C. to present it to President Roosevelt. Then there's the Nevada Day celebration, every year in honor of Nevada becoming a state on October 31st, 1864. There's a few historical reenactments. The entire town of Virginia City is shut down so that all may attend the festivities in Carson City. One of the reenactments is the Pony Express ride, which follows the original route. A 3-cent red-brown stamp issued on April 3, 1940, commemorated the 80th anniversary of the founding of the Pony Express. The Pony Express Centennial Celebration was organized by the 1957 Western Governors Conference, proposed by Utah's 10th governor, George Dewey Clyde, to the 8 governors from the states that the original Pony Express route traveled through. Even President Dwight Eisenhower agreed to be the honorary chairman of the board. The elected president of the Centennial Celebration was Waddell F. Smith, the great-grandson of one of the founders, William Bradford Waddell. There were organized riders and mounts from the 8 states for the reenactments, but riding clubs and horsemen were allowed to participate also. Riding both ways between Sacramento and St. Joseph between July 19th and 28th of 1960, President Eisenhower sent letters to each of the governors in the 8 trail states. The National Pony Express Association celebrated the 150th anniversary of the Pony Express in 2010. It took 20 days to ride the Pony Express trail route. It took place just throughout the day so that there were more celebrations and interactions with the public to experience the Pony Express. Apart from Buffalo Bill dramatizing the Pony Express, the first book dedicated solely to the Pony Express was not published until the 1900s. There's even a plentiful amount of films produced about it, from 1925's The Pony Express, Frontier Pony Express, Last of the Pony Riders, to even television shows, one show dedicated to it in 1959 called The Pony Express. There's even a comic book called Lucky Luke, which features volumes dedicated, or at least has high involvement with the Pony Express. The Pony Express is but a small piece of the American West, but no less significant.